From a studio boss who defied her board to a war hero hiding a secret injury, and even a famous line that was never actually spoken. Prepare to uncover 15 shocking facts about Star Trek, including how the cast of the Enterprise finally reached the stars decades after the cameras stopped rolling. Star Trek transformed a mere 3-year television run into one of the most iconic science fiction narratives ever told. Premiering on NBC in 1966, it launched the USS Enterprise and her crew on a 5-year mission that ultimately lasted only 3. The series starred William Shatner as the confident Captain James T. Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as the logical Mr. Spock, DeForest Kelley as the grumpy doctor, Leonard Bones McCoy, Nichelle Nichols as communications officer Lieutenant Uhura, George Takei as helmsman Hikaru Sulu, and James Doohan as chief engineer Montgomery Scotty Scott. Across 79 episodes, Star Trek initially struggled to find an audience, faced cancellation threats twice, and was eventually pulled from the schedule in 1969. Yet, beneath the wobbly sets and tight budget lay a rich history, filled with near cancellations, borrowed religious gestures, a war hero concealing a real injury, shrewd royalty deals, and a studio boss who intervened when everyone else was ready to walk away. Our first revelation centers on Lucille Ball, who famously refused to cancel the show. Star Trek nearly met its end before a single episode aired. In 1965, NBC rejected the show's initial pilot, The Cage. The network found it confusing, and Desilu Productions, the studio behind the show, grew anxious. This almost sealed the series' fate. However, Lucille Ball, who owned and ran Desilu and was one of Hollywood's most powerful women, stepped in. She decided to fund a second pilot using her studio's own money. Her board of directors considered it a terrible idea, and her accountants warned that another expensive space-ish show could bankrupt the entire company. Despite their concerns, she approved it. A well-known anecdote suggests that Ball didn't even grasp Star Trek's concept, reportedly believing it was about entertainers traveling to perform for American troops overseas. Even after someone clarified that it actually featured a spaceship and an alien with pointed ears, she remained steadfast in her decision. This second pilot evolved into the episode Where No Man Has Gone Before, which NBC subsequently approved. Without Lucille Ball, there would be no Enterprise, no Spock, no films, conventions, or spin-offs. The entire franchise owes its existence to one woman who overruled her own board and gambled on a show no one else believed in. Next, we uncover the story of the female first officer erased from history. Long before audiences met Mr. Spock, the original first officer aboard the Enterprise was a woman. In the 1965 pilot, The Cage, Majel Barrett played a character known only as Number 1. She was calm, analytical, unemotional, and completely in command. NBC, however, rejected her. Network executives argued that audiences would not accept a woman giving orders to men, especially one who didn't appear warm or agreeable. It also didn't help that Barrett was romantically involved with Gene Roddenberry, making the network uneasy about an unknown actress holding such a prominent on-screen role. When NBC requested a second pilot, Number 1 was quietly removed, but Roddenberry didn't discard the character entirely. Instead, he transferred all her distinctive traits, her calm logic, emotional restraint, and cool intelligence, directly into Spock. In the first pilot, Spock had actually been more emotional and reactive. After the rewrite, he became the deeply logical figure audiences would come to recognize, precisely because those qualities originally belonged to Number 1. Majel Barrett remained an integral part of Star Trek, taking on the new role of Nurse Christine Chapel. She later married Roddenberry and, for the rest of her life, voiced the Enterprise computer across multiple Star Trek series. Our third fact reveals that Spock was almost red, and NBC initially thought he looked satanic. Spock's appearance nearly took a very different turn. Gene Roddenberry originally envisioned him with red skin to enhance his alien look. However, this plan quickly unraveled upon reviewing the test footage. In 1966, most Americans still owned black and white televisions, and red makeup appeared as a muddy gray on those screens, looking strange rather than alien. The idea was swiftly abandoned. NBC then voiced a different concern. Executives looked at Spock's pointed ears and sharp eyebrows and concluded he looked satanic, worrying about potential complaints from religious viewers. Early publicity photos were even edited to round his ears and soften his eyebrows, making him appear more human. Makeup artist Fred Phillips eventually resolved the color issue by switching to a yellow-green tint. This looked fine on set, but when the film was developed, the lab repeatedly assumed something was wrong and corrected Spock back to a normal pink skin tone. Even the technicians couldn't believe a green-skinned officer was intentional. Once the show finally aired, audiences didn't perceive a devil, they saw the breakout star of the entire series. Moving on, our fourth fact explores how the iconic Vulcan salute originated from a childhood memory. This hand gesture, one of the most famous in the world, did not come from a script. It was inspired by Leonard Nimoy peeking during a religious service as a young boy. Nimoy, who grew up in Boston, attended an Orthodox Jewish synagogue with his family. During a special blessing, the congregation was instructed to close their eyes or look away, as tradition held that a holy presence arrived at that moment, and no one was supposed to witness it. Young Leonard, however, looked anyway, and what he saw remained with him forever. The priests held their hands out with their fingers split into a V shape, forming a Hebrew letter called Shin, which is linked to one of God's names. This solemn ancient gesture deeply impressed the curious boy. Years later, while filming the second season episode, Amok Time, the script required a Vulcan greeting. Nimoy suggested the hand shape he remembered from his childhood. The director agreed. The cameras rolled, and an ancient religious symbol quietly became a part of science fiction history. Nimoy later expressed that one of his greatest joys was knowing that millions of fans worldwide were unknowingly blessing each other every time they uttered, "Live long and prosper." Our fifth revelation concerns the kiss that terrified a network. In 1968, Star Trek aired the episode Plato's Stepchildren, which featured a kiss between William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols. While the moment seems mild today, in 1968 it triggered alarm bells across NBC. The network feared a backlash, particularly from stations in the American South, which might refuse to broadcast the episode. Executives demanded a second version of the scene, one where Shatner and Nichols would lean in but never actually touch. The studio hoped this safer take could replace the real kiss and avert any controversy. However, the two actors had other plans. According to Nichols, she and Shatner deliberately sabotaged every single alternate take. They crossed their eyes, flubbed their timing, and made goofy faces. On the very last attempt, Shatner reportedly stared directly into the camera, ensuring his expression couldn't be edited out. Production ultimately ran out of time and money, leaving the real kiss as the only clean take available. NBC braced itself for a deluge of angry letters. But the letters never came. Instead, the network received a huge wave of positive mail, with many viewers expressing confusion as to why anyone would be upset in the first place. The audience, it turned out, was already far ahead of the executives, who had spent weeks trying to protect them. Our sixth surprising fact reveals that James Doohan, who played the beloved chief engineer Scotty, was a real-life war hero. Long before he joined the Enterprise, Doohan served as a lieutenant in the Canadian Army. On June 6, 1944, a day forever known as D-Day, he landed on Juno Beach in France. Under intense gunfire, he courageously led his ensign through a minefield and helped eliminate 2 German snipers. For most soldiers, such action would define a lifetime. But for Doohan, the day was far from over. Later that night, while moving between command posts in the dark, a nervous Canadian guard mistook him for the enemy and shot him 6 times. 4 bullets struck his leg, 1 shattered his right middle finger, and the 6th was aimed directly at his chest, a shot that should have been fatal. Miraculously, it hit a silver cigarette case in his pocket, a gift from his brother, stopping the bullet and saving his life. He lost the finger but kept his life. When Doohan joined Star Trek as Montgomery Scott, he meticulously worked to conceal his missing finger, employing careful camera angles and specific hand placements. During dialogue, he might hold his hand a certain way, as he did when delivering lines like, "We don't have any spare circulating pump for a thing like that. I haven't seen a PXK in 20 years. In extreme close-ups, the show sometimes even used a hand double. He simply didn't want viewers to be distracted by a war injury every time Scotty worked the controls. Most fans never noticed, though a few sharp-eyed viewers eventually spotted the missing finger, particularly during The Trouble with Tribbles, where Scotty's hand briefly appeared buried in a pile of fuzzy aliens. It turned out the Enterprise's chief engineer truly had been the toughest guy in the room all along. This leads us to our 7th fact, the Tribbles that just wouldn't go away. The Trouble with Tribbles was conceived as a fun, light-hearted Star Trek episode about small, fuzzy creatures that multiplied uncontrollably and took over the Enterprise. On screen, it was harmless silliness. Behind the scenes, however, it became a problem that plagued the crew for weeks. To create the illusion of thousands of Tribbles, the prop team actually built only about 500. These were simple puffs of fake fur stuffed with foam rubber, some containing wind-up toy dog parts to make them wobble across the floor. They were cheap, effective, and incredibly cute, but also nearly impossible to get rid of. After filming concluded, the tribbles persisted, reappearing for weeks in the most unexpected places, in lighting rigs, desk drawers, air vents, and tucked into equipment cases. No one remembered putting them there. DeForest Kelley later remarked that the little furballs just kept appearing like tiny surprises for an already exhausted crew. The problem escalated as the cast found it hilarious, leading people to hide tribbles in each other's costumes and lunch bags. Kelley once even pulled a tribble out of a patient's body during a completely different episode, just to amuse his fellow actors. The props had stopped multiplying and started pranking. The famous avalanche scene, where a storage door opens and buries William Shatner in a wave of fur, took 8 takes to get right. The crew members dropping tribbles from above couldn't see Shatner underneath, so they simply kept throwing more to be safe. When production finally wrapped, many tribbles vanished into personal collections, while others were donated to the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, where they remain on display today. Our 8th fact highlights the extraordinary power of the fans who saved the show. Long before the era of hashtags and online petitions, Star Trek fans orchestrated one of the largest letter-writing campaigns in television history, fueled by typewriters, stamps, and sheer determination. In late 1967, news spread that NBC intended to cancel Star Trek after its 2nd season, a decision fans refused to accept. A dedicated Star Trek enthusiast and her husband organized a letter-writing effort, unlike anything television had ever witnessed. They devised a simple strategy called the Rule of 10. One fan would write to NBC, and then persuade 10 friends to do the same. With each of those friends, recruit 10 more. This idea rapidly proliferated, and letters flooded NBC's offices. While NBC officially stated they received over 106,000 letters, the true count, including petitions and group mailings, was reportedly closer to 1 million. The sheer volume of mail was so overwhelming that the network reconsidered, announcing the show's renewal for a 3rd season during a live broadcast. They even politely asked fans to cease sending mail. A second wave of fan activism emerged after the show's eventual cancellation. College students at Caltech, MIT, and Berkeley organized torchlight marches with signs proclaiming, "It is totally illogical to cancel Star Trek." Throughout the 1970s, fans successfully lobbied NASA to name the very first space shuttle Enterprise. They continuously pressured studios to revive the show through reruns, conventions, and ultimately, the first Star Trek movie. The series endured because its viewers refused to let it go, and their fervent campaign became the blueprint for fan movements ever since. Next, we delve into the theme song trick that made Gene Roddenberry rich. The opening theme of Star Trek sounds grand and inspiring, intentionally crafted that way by composer Alexander Courage. However, what most viewers never realized is that Roddenberry collected half the royalties from that music for years without writing a single note of it. Here's how it worked. Courage's contract included a standard clause common in the music industry at the time. If someone added lyrics to the theme song, that person would be legally entitled to half of the royalties every time the song played. Royalties are the small payments a songwriter receives each time their music is used, so Roddenberry wrote lyrics. They weren't particularly good, nor were they ever intended to be sung, featuring lines about love wandering through starlight, words that sounded more like a greeting card than a TV theme. Roddenberry never planned to put them on the air. He simply wrote them down and filed them. That single act made him a co-writer in the eyes of the royalty system. Every time Star Trek aired, half of the payment that should have gone to Courage went to Roddenberry instead. Courage was understandably furious. He knew the move was legal, but considered it utterly unfair. The two men never collaborated effectively again, and Courage did not return to score later seasons. Meanwhile, Star Trek continued to air, with reruns spreading worldwide, followed by films. Those unsung lyrics ultimately earned millions of dollars for Roddenberry, and later his estate. Our 10th fact explores the communicator that inspired the modern cell phone. In Star Trek, the handheld communicator was pure fantasy. A small device with a quick flip of the lid, enabling instant conversation across vast distances. In 1966, it seemed impossible. Yet, a few years later, a Motorola engineer transformed that fantasy into reality. Martin Cooper, who invented the first handheld mobile phone in 1973, has openly stated that Star Trek helped inspire him. He He watched Captain Kirk flip open his communicator and speak into it, believing the real world deserved something similar. This story has been repeated for decades. Cooper later clarified a fuller truth. His actual childhood inspiration had been the two-way wrist radio used by the comic strip detective Dick Tracy, which first sparked his imagination as a child. However, when documentary crews arrived with cameras, the Star Trek version made for a more compelling narrative, and he embraced it. Motorola fully embraced it too. When the company released a mobile phone called the StarTAC in 1996, the name itself was a direct tribute to the Starship Enterprise. Its distinctive flip-open design was no accident either. It was a deliberate nod to Kirk's communicator. In essence, science fiction from the 1960s finally landed in people's pockets 3 decades later. Our 11th intriguing fact concerns the hometown of a captain who hasn't even been born yet. In 1985, the small town of Riverside, Iowa, made an unusual declaration, officially proclaiming itself the future birthplace of Captain James T. Kirk. This entire idea stemmed from a single line in a 1968 book titled The Making of Star Trek, which mentioned that Kirk was born in a small town in Iowa. There was no specific town, no county seat, nothing on a map. Riverside simply volunteered. The town council unanimously voted to claim the honor, and Gene Roddenberry himself gave them his personal blessing. This transformed Riverside into a unique entity in the Star Trek world, becoming an unofficial part of the official story. Over the years, the town embraced its role with genuine enthusiasm. They built a museum called The Voyage Home, placed a marker at the exact spot where Kirk will one day be born, and a local bar even added a plaque for the location where Kirk will be conceived. Every June, Riverside hosts Trek Fest, a vibrant festival featuring parades, costumes, panels, and appearances by Star Trek actors, including William Shatner and George Takei. It is quite literally a real-world birthday party for a man who has not yet been born. Then, in 2009, the reboot film simply titled Star Trek made Riverside official on the big screen. The movie depicted Kirk's Iowa hometown for the first time, confirming what the town had been quietly claiming for nearly 25 years. Captain Kirk was born in the future, claimed in the present, and finally confirmed by Hollywood decades later. Our 12th fact addresses the persistent girdle rumor surrounding William Shatner. This claim has followed him for 60 years, often repeated as fact by many fans, that Shatner wore a girdle under his Starfleet shirt to maintain Captain Kirk's trim appearance for the camera. It's a topic frequently brought up at fan conventions, circulated in online forums, and mentioned in articles about classic television. Yet, none of it is true. Shatner has consistently denied the rumor in interviews, books, and in person, with the kind of patience one would expect from a man who has been questioned about his underwear for half a century. The rumor likely endures because 1960s television studios were indeed highly concerned with the physical appearance of their leading men, and the pressure was real. However, the specific belief that Shatner was squeezing into something beneath his uniform is simply incorrect. The story probably originated because Kirk's physique subtly changed between seasons, a natural occurrence when an actor works long hours on a demanding show for 3 consecutive years. From there, a casual joke at a convention could have morphed into an online claim, which then became a piece of trivia that fans still debate. Shatner has remained a good sport throughout, his answer always the same: no girdle, just an actor dedicated to his craft. Our 13th surprising fact unveils the famous line that was never actually said: "Beam me up, Scotty." This phrase feels like an undeniable part of Star Trek, as evidenced by lines like, "Scott, prepare to beam us up." It has appeared on t-shirts, bumper stickers, coffee mugs, and in countless parodies for over 50 years. Millions of people, many of whom have never seen a single episode, can quote it. There's just one catch. Captain Kirk never utters this exact phrase, not once in any of the 79 original episodes. Kirk comes incredibly close many times, saying things like, "Scotty, beam us up," or "beam me up," or "Scotty, get us out of here." The wording varied from scene to scene, usually depending on the crew's level of danger, but the precise version everyone remembers never actually appeared in the show. By the 1990s, even the cast had given up trying to correct anyone. James Doohan himself titled his 1996 autobiography, "Beam Me Up, Scotty." At that point, attempting to fight the phrase would have been futile. The line had grown larger than the show that inspired it, becoming shorthand for an entire era of television, spoken by people who had no idea they were quoting something that was never actually said. Our 14th fact reveals how Martin Luther King Jr., personally convinced Nichelle Nichols to stay on Star Trek. After the first season, Nichols was ready to leave. Broadway was calling, and she missed the stage. Her resignation letter was practically written. She planned to return to her first love, musical theater, and leave the enterprise behind. Then she attended an AP fundraising event in Beverly Hills. During the event, an organizer approached her, saying someone in the room, her biggest fan, wanted to meet her. Nichols turned, expecting a regular Star Trek viewer, but instead found herself face-to-face with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When Nichols mentioned her intention to leave the show, King stopped her cold. He implored her not to quit, not for money or fame, but because of what Lieutenant Uhura represented to people across the country. For the very first time on American television, a black woman was portrayed not as a maid, a punchline, or a silent background character. She was intelligent, professional, and respected by her crewmates. King then shared something Nichols hadn't expected. He told her that Star Trek was the only program he and his wife, Coretta, allowed their children to stay up late to watch. To him, it was more than entertainment. It was a vision of a future that behaved better than the present. The following Monday, Nichols returned to Gene Roddenberry's office and retracted her resignation. According to her own account, Roddenberry became emotional and said, "Finally someone gets it. And finally, for our 15th and most poignant fact, the Star Trek cast truly did reach the stars." Gene Roddenberry dedicated his life to imagining a future where humans traveled among the stars. After his death in 1991, the stars, in a sense, came for him. The first journey occurred quietly in 1992, when a small portion of Roddenberry's ashes flew aboard the space shuttle Columbia for a brief trip in Earth orbit before returning home. It was a symbolic gesture arranged by his widow for a man whose vision always pointed upward. The second mission ventured much further. In 1997, Roddenberry's remains were part of the first memorial spaceflight in history that individuals could pay to join. His ashes were launched into orbit alongside those of counterculture figure Timothy Leary, an unusual travel companion by any measure. The capsule orbited Earth for about 5 years before re-entering the atmosphere in 2002, burning up like a shooting star, a send-off that almost seemed scripted. Things grew even more remarkable from there. In 2008, a space tourist brought a small amount of James Doohan's ashes with him to the International Space Station, where they were stored inside one of the station's modules. The most extensive voyage arrived in January 2024. A company called Celestis launched a memorial mission aboard a powerful rocket known as the Vulcan Centaur. This capsule carried the remains of Gene Roddenberry, Majel Barrett, Nichelle Nichols, James Doohan, and DeForest Kelley beyond Earth's gravity and into an orbit around the Sun. Star Trek had always promised a future among the stars. More than 50 years after the first episode aired, the people who built that future finally reached it themselves.